Because we do not know when we will die, we get to think of life as an inexhaustible well. And yet everything happens only a certain number of times, and a very small number, really. How many more times will you remember a certain afternoon of your childhood? An afternoon that is so deeply a part of your being that you can't even conceive of your life without it. Perhaps 4 or 5 times more, perhaps not even that. How many more times will you watch the full moon rise? Perhaps 20, and yet it all seems limitless.
Some movies you just don't touch. Studios see film as properties now, and while some films lend themselves well to sequels and expanded universes, others don't. Because art sometimes is an expression of deeper human experience, and sometimes commodifying it feels immoral, unethical. When Brandon Lee died in a tragic accident on the set of 1994's The Crow, director Alex Proyas didn't even want to return to finish the film, but Lee's fiancée encouraged him, if not only to show the world that Lee wasn't just the son of the legendary actor Bruce Lee, rather that he was a terrific actor in his own right. The Crow is based on the graphic novel by James O'Barr, something O'Barr wrote after his fiancée was lost in a tragic accident. The graphic novel was his form of catharsis, channeling his pain and unformed grief into something tangible. I honestly can't imagine how O'Barr must have felt, seeing his channeling of raw grief take form before him, only to see the actor playing his creation pass away. Actor Michael Massey, who held the gun that fired the lethal round, was traumatized for life. Massey wasn't at fault, it was a mix of different factors outside of his control, but when he ultimately did pass away, his obituary would refer to him as the man who killed Brandon Lee. But this video isn't about Brandon Lee necessarily. It's not about Massey. It's not even about James O'Barr. It's about people who hear these human tragedies and think, yeah, I can make money off of this. To date, there have been 3 sequels to The Crow, a television remake of the original movie, and a remake of the first film set for release later this year. A cinematic remake, not a televised remake like the first one. It's been 30 years since The Crow came out, to the day, and I have so many mixed feelings and complicated thoughts about this film and its entire general franchise. It's not something that's easy to talk about, so I figured in this case, I'd ask a friend to help.
My name is Lizzie Gravel. I'm known on Twitter as Lizzie Lemon Drop. I guess you can call me a film academic. It's a phrase I quite like. My main area of expertise is on like 70s through the 90s American horror films, and I have an extreme and aggressive affection for The Crow, both the original graphic novel and the original film.
So, what about The Crow stands out so much? To a younger viewer, The Crow might seem odd. It's a very dark, off-kilter film about a man who rises from the dead to take revenge, which isn't so uncommon. You know, we have a lot of films like that. A lot of revenge movies. A lot of horror films that deal with rising from the grave. On the surface, it sounds like a cross between these two concepts, with maybe some light superhero comic booky elements thrown in as well. But where the film succeeds is its aesthetic and its emotional through line. First, the aesthetics. This film screams mid-90s goth and alternative. If you didn't realize, Eric and Shelley's names derive from goth icons. Eric, the Phantom from the Phantom of the Opera, and Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. The entire concept of a ghoul rising from the grave is straight out of the classic Gothic tradition. The presence of a crow is a dark reflection of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, where the poem focuses on this raven that is perceived by the paranoid narrator as a messenger from the dark Plutonian shore of death.
Why don't you tell me a story? A man and a woman in law a year ago. Motherfucking mom. Listen!
I just remember seeing someone reference it and thinking that the shots they were showing were just gorgeous. I was like, that looks awesome. that looks rad. I want to go watch that. And I just sort of sought out the film out of my own interest. I want to say I was about 14 or 15 years old. Probably the first time I saw it. And then I read the graphic novel when I was in college. So when I was about 18 or 19.
That makes sense. That's, again, for me, I think I was a little too young to have when I first watched it. I think I might have been like 11 or 12. Because like it looked like Batman. You know, when you're a kid and like, you know, the Tim Burton Batman is one of your favorite like superhero films when you're like a kid. You think, oh wow, that looks so cool, and then you see something that looks very similar. And I feel like as I've gotten older, even though I love the original Tim Burton Batman, I feel like my love of The Crow has just gotten more and more intense. You know, I feel like a lot of films at the time, they're trying to get a lot of that neo-noir or classic noir graphic novel aesthetic. And I think it influences like the miniatures in this movie, the way the lighting is, but the way that they do it in this, there's something about it so surreal and almost like spectral at times. I can't even find the right words for it. It's like a neo-noir, yes, but also like a hellscape gothic nightmare.
So like one of the brilliant things about the aesthetic for The Crow, it like in its cinematography, in its set design, in its all of its production design, is that it, first of all, is just unashamed and leans into everything it wants to be. It's not trying to make any. It's not trying to like feel real or realistic. It's letting you exist in this much more dreamy space. But it is simultaneously, it's a gothic romance. It's a tragedy. It's, like you said, very much a neo-noir in its stylism, and it's an urban fantasy. So it's all of these things, and it brings it together nicely, and so it's very singular in that way. Because yeah, Batman is a comic book, and it's a neo-noir, and like Tim Burton likes his goth aesthetic, but it's not really a gothic romance the way something like The Crow is, or like something like Candyman is also a gothic romance.
Be my victim.
Although very differently, I'd say. I feel like Candyman is more grounded in the realism of the city, of the landscape of a real city. Whereas this feels, even though it's Detroit, it feels like this very fantastic. It's almost like comparing two types of pictures. It's like two people painted a city, and one painted it based on the layout of the buildings, the architectural design of to make sure you get the layers of as things change over time. Whereas this is more when you look at a city quickly and turn away and try to remember what it looked like. That's what this feels like. The almost constructed,
the way a dream might recreate it.
Exactly, like the mental recreation of something. Whereas, you know, other movies, they try to go for realism, and this tries to avoid realism. Like, the first image you get are these beautiful miniatures, and it looks like the city's on fire, and it looks like and the lighting is hellish, but also there's a gothic beauty, like an old-fashioned like cathedral almost, I feel at times. But it's not quite that. It's fragmented and you know, a maw almost of a beast. But I'm sure people living in Detroit don't like that too much. But
not to I promise there's a point, so not to like get off of topic at all. But one of my favorite films ever made is The Company of Wolves.
The Company of Wolves, where fairy tales end and nightmares begin. The Company of Wolves.
And something I always will like opine about, like rap poetic about, when I talk about The Company of Wolves, is the way that like every single set feel like it's a film where everything is obviously a set by intention, right? But every single set in the woods, in the cottage, in the village, like I don't feel like there's really anything outside of the space that I'm in, and that adds to this very like dream. I'm in a dream.
A young girl feels her soul awaken to the call of emotions she cannot name. This is the Twilight world, where half-forgotten memories of childhood lead into a fantastic realm.
When you're dreaming, that's always how it feels. Like your mind has only created the space it's trying to show you, and there isn't a sense of space outside of that. And I feel like The Crow, with its depiction of a city, it very much feels the same way. When I'm in one city block, I don't feel like I have a sense of what else is outside of this city block. We're in this scene, we're in this part of the dream and the story.
I hope the expressionist graphic thing really comes through. I think that as a genre, comic books hardly been explored in film yet.
Beyond just the visuals, you also have the music. The Crow soundtrack has to be one of the best movie soundtracks of the 90s, featuring tons of iconic bands. The Cure, Nine Inch Nails, Rage Against the Machine, Pantera, and that's just a few of them. The sound of The Crow, I feel, would have a profound impact on the sound of just about every edgy, gothy thing to come after. From The Craft, to Blade, to...
I'm a hex girl, and I'm gonna put a spell on you.
The goth aesthetic has is like, yes, I understand that we consider it like this is a very countercultural like thing, and it's a subculture and it's off kilter, but like whatever you want to say, it is actually ultimately a very timeless aesthetic, because the goth aesthetic and the goth subculture has its aesthetic basis in like classical and like classicism and Catholicism and like it's and like Victorian era clothing, and like it's timeless in a lot of ways. It's not trapped to a subculture of the 90s. Like the goth aesthetic was there in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and then in the 2000s. It still exists now. Like, no, it is not the thing we recognize as the mainstream counterculture, but like it still exists. So like this is not, it's just not, it's not equivalent. Like the aesthetic of the SoundCloud rapper with his shitty, like piecemeal tattoos.
No, it's not the same.
It's not the same.
And here's the thing too, and I find this interesting with the goth subculture, because I was never like cool enough to dress like that. I was never good enough to pull off those outlooks, but I was always friends with the guys who pulled off those looks, because they're all really chill. I've never met a mean goth person. Like most, I mean, I met a couple, but like most have really laid back and chill and high half the time.
Say, are you some kind of ghost? Boo.
And what I love about the original Crow is that the movie, not the graphic novel, because the graphic novel is born from grief. The Crow movie is not so much born from that same grief. There's so much levity in it, and there's so much charm in it, and there's so much optimism in it. And I feel that really is more emblematic of every goth person I ever met, where there is that darkness and there is that sadness, but there's also that humor in the face of timelessness, of age, of death, that I think really is emblematic of the goth subculture in a lot of ways. And I feel like every version of The Crow, they see scary goth person, oh, Slipknot give me nightmares when I was a kid, and they don't think of how to, like, Slipknot's not even goth, but like, you know, in that conversation at least.
This type of executive does not understand the distinction between nu metal and goth music.
100%. What they think Linkin Park is, I mean, they won't even go for like one that's remotely connected, like Evanescence. They'll just go for like Linkin Park as they go to. But the aesthetics of The Crow, that's one component of the film's success. Every single film attempting to capitalize on The Crow's success could copy the makeup and the dark outfits, though did they is another question.
It's another time, it's another world, and another has been chosen.
No, the big reason why The Crow resonates with so many people is that emotional through line.
You okay?
I saw her. I saw her through your eyes.
Eric and Shelley are killed by an act of cruel, meaningless violence. In the comic, they're attacked on the roadside. In the film, they're executed in their own apartment. The grief of this traumatic, painful incident is what drives Eric to rise up to enact revenge against those who wronged him.
The comic book is an underground comic book. It's not Spider-Man or Superman. You know, it's not something for mass consumption. And it has a very hard edge to it.
While the film is at least cathartic in its revenge, showing each execution as a dark reflection of what these men did to Eric and Shelley, the comic lacks this catharsis. Eric Draven's revenge there is cruel, bitter. The Crow, who in the comic is a sentient, living bird, constantly warns Eric to stop pursuing his pain, to stop looking to the past and lingering in lost, agonizing memories. It's a disturbing story that even the film shies away from. Rather, in the film, Eric finds joy in life.
Little things used to mean so much to Shelley. I used to think they were kind of trivial. Believe me, nothing is trivial.
So, obviously, the graphic novel and the film, they're very different beasts, right? So, but in ways they're similar. There's a lot of plot points that are similar, a lot of ideas that are similar, a lot of themes that are similar. But when I watch the movie The Crow, it feels like a film, whereas the graphic novel, there's something so ethereal, and I don't want to ever say one is better than the other because they're so different. They tell the same story to a different fashion, but there is something so hard to capture and hard to grasp about how the graphic novel isn't really a story about rising conflict, about revenge. It's very much a story of grief and like almost avoiding grief in its own sad way. And I feel it's not traditional in a lot of storytelling we see in cinema, especially.
I would call the graphic novel, it's painful to read. Like it's trauma and grief and anger and like agony on a page.
And he gradually learns along with the audience why he's come back, what his mission is. In the comic book, right from page one, he knows exactly what he's there for.
Like it's turned into a brand now. And so like not to be too cynical about it, but like The Crow, this was not written to be Batman. This was not written to be part of a broader story initially. This was written as such a personal thing that he needed to get onto the page. He needed to express it. He needed to get it out. And that what I was going to say is that what I love about especially like the early art style is that it's so inspired by like, it's very ink blotchy. It's very like raw. It feels like someone who is weeping in their living room. And they have an inkwell, and this is what they need. This is what they can make with it. It's
almost like raw and like rough and very utilitarian. I think I would say also. Yeah. But then you get like stuff, and I'm not sure, and obviously I don't have the original floppies, so I can't speak to what was first published, and I'm hesitating to show some panels that I think are beautiful, like the one where, because there is so much nudity and there is so much violence. YouTube will kill me if I do too much of it.
Especially, I think I probably know the one you want to show because
they're like,
I'm also...
Is it the one where it's the kind of like the smoky kind of silhouette? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
it's much more sketched out. It's much softer.
Oh yeah.
It's
beautiful, and there's even an image also in the graphic novel that I was considering showing, but YouTube doesn't like animal cruelty. Where it's in the start of the graphic novel where a horse runs into barbed wire, and the wire just it plunges into its hide, and it's this combination of extreme beauty and extreme like savage cruelty, like the indifference of nature, the running free without limits, and then all of a sudden that's it, and it's that kind of cruel abrasiveness that I feel the Crow graphic novel embodies. The film, I feel there's a lot of levity to it, and I think that works great for the film. I think that levity brings a lot of dimension to it. But it's also not a story of grief the same way the graphic novels. It's a story of grief, but it's not the same kind of grief, because that is way more of a collaborative effort, whereas the graphic novel is one person's like raw, like
preserving that hard edge and a certain style that the comic book certainly has. But we had the responsibility to fill in some gaps that aren't necessarily there in the comic book because they're different mediums. You don't have to tell a cohesive narrative story in a comic book. You can do a lot with images and leave a lot up to the imagination of the reader.
So I do also want to say, for all that we are going to opine about what's different about the graphic novel and the film, there's a reason why fans of the graphic novel also universally adore the film. Is because while they are different in so many ways, it feels like a deeply honest and understanding adaptation of the characters and the work.
Agreed.
Right? It's like it really translates the emotions so well.
The original film is a classic. Now, Lizzie and I went into more detail about it in our full interview, which you can watch on our Patreon or member section on YouTube. But yeah, The Crow means a lot to both of us, and to many others. It meant so much to director Alex Proyas that when he was approached by Harvey Weinstein to turn The Crow into a cinematic franchise, he refused. He couldn't continue it. That was it for him. One film, and he was done, because the loss, the tragedy, it was too much. In fact, no one returned from the original Crow to the sequel. Not a single actor, maybe a couple crew members, but no actors returned. The writer didn't return. No one was on board. This leads us to The Crow, City of Angels, a film which is the most divisive entry in the Crow series, because it's the only one people disagree on. No one thinks it's good, but people wonder whether or not it was a missed opportunity, stunted by Weinstein interference, or if it was always going to be bad. Or, if anyone doesn't know about the behind-the-scenes story, how bad it was compared to the later entries. This is mostly because it's one of those great what-could-have-been stories. Good Bad Flicks does a terrific breakdown of the film's troubled production. All of that in his video, which I will link in the description because it is worth watching.
Knew getting into a second picture that we would be stepping on a really cherished film and character in a manner in which we felt we had to, in a sense, improve if it was at all possible.
To summarize, though, director Tim Pope, who worked primarily on music videos for The Cure, tried to make an ambitious film, one that dealt with life, death, loss, isolation, grief. And it was written by David S. Goyer, the same person who would later go on to write the Blade movies, direct the third one, and draft the Christopher Nolan Batman scripts as well as Man of Steel script.
Really, the mandate for this film was make it the same but different.
However, this vision of grief was forced into a generic box by the Weinsteins, who wanted something more akin to the first film. And because of that, a massively shot with all the it was all shot. It was a very, very long film. It was truncated, re-edited, reworked, refilmed until it was a generic shell of its former self.
Nobody wants them to retread or just, bigger explosions just aren't going to do it. There has to be something fresh brought to the story. It has to expand in some way. Otherwise there's no reason to continue it.
Now, a few highlights of City of Angels. Iggy Pop and Thoy Trang, the Yellow Power Ranger, are in this movie. Actually, Iggy Pop is interesting because the Crow's original design is heavily inspired by Iggy Pop, but yeah, you get the idea. But the film itself, it's a mess. The only returning character is Sarah, who is recast with an older actress. She moves to the City of Angels after the terrible events of the first film in Detroit, only to somehow find herself in a situation nearly identical to the last film, complete with a criminal underworld, a soul returning from the dead to get revenge, and yeah, you get it. Ultimately, she is killed at the end of the film in a very depressing and very disappointing finale. What's interesting I find too is that even the first sequel, City of Angels, that was still trying to be like, when they were trying to make a good movie and then the Weinsteins undercut them, they bring Sarah back in that second film.
Which is, I think, a good idea in concept, but I did not like the way they handled her character.
100%. No, I think it's a terrible execution, but the idea, but at least that shows they were thinking of the thematic key elements from the prior film and trying to incorporate them. They didn't succeed at that by any means, and the film is a complete disaster of biblical proportions. In part also because what it could have been versus what it was, and I don't even know if what it could have been was all that good of an idea anyway. Like, that's the other thing too. Like, people talk,
Should you even have made this?
Exactly. Like, people say, oh, the movie could have been great, but like, yeah, it could have been, but that's no guarantee it was going to be great at all. You know, it was supposed to be like a 3-hour film. Like, that's like
much.
That's a lot. That's a lot of stuff. Like, I mean, and you could have cut it probably. Maybe it would have been cut by like two hours, but like that's a lot of stuff you're gonna put into a Crow sequel. You don't need that much space to tell the story. But even then, at least they still thought of these elements. This, it's like, I don't know. I'm feeling like it's like everything I see is like a red flag, and at a certain point, you're like, there's so many fucking red flags. At what point do you go? Cut this loose. There's no way. One key component that City of Angels brought to the table was the introduction of Ash Corvin, the new Crow, played by Vincent Perez, who was later in Queen of the Damned. Now, Corvin isn't Eric Draven, since everyone involved, save for the Weinsteins, felt it would be disrespectful to recast Eric after Brandon Lee's passing. This would not be the same case for the television show, which is basically just the original Crow, except cheaper looking and brighter and less abstract.
A sideshow psychic has a message for Eric.
She's waiting for you, mister.
On the next Crow Stairway to Heaven.
Next on Fox.
I'm not sure if you ever saw this also with the Crow. I was going through the Internet Archive a few months ago, and I found a restored version of the television series The Crow from the night. Not good. I don't think it's good at all, but like, it was interesting comparing, because it is a remake of the Eric Draven story specifically, and it is very cheap. I don't want to say soulless, I want to say cheap, because there's a distinction between being cheap and being soulless. I feel like they were earnestly trying to do a story. I just think, A, they really had no money, and B, from my understanding, I don't know everything about it, but it sounds like they had no money, and B, they were just doing the first film, but like in daylight half the time, and like in a normal city setting, which is just completely misses the point.
Why are you doing it? I'm aware that this exists. I've never seen it.
It's not good. Don't waste your time. Anyway, Corvin's motivation isn't the death of his lover, but rather the death of his son, who is killed after the two of them stumble into some gang executions. What's disappointing about City of Angels is that Corvin's loss is never really explored in the film. Unlike the graphic novel and first movie, City of Angels is, in its final form, more focused on toned-down supernatural antics, psychic dreams, and awkward fight scenes, rather than grief or the value of life. The original City of Angels, as written, did focus on grief, did focus on loss, did focus on the isolation one feels after loss, only for the Weinsteins to pressure the director and writer to revamp the film to be more commercial. This makes it one of those great what-if movies. What if the Weinsteins didn't interfere with the City of Angels? Would it have been a good sequel? Well, I don't know. In fact, I'm not sure if City of Angels were released in its original cut that it would have been successful at all. The City of Angels, though, at least tried to be aesthetically different in some way. The color scheme was different to distinguish it from the first film. But obviously, at the end of the day, it was still a Crow sequel and was forced to be more like The Crow than Tim Pope originally intended. But there are other Crow films, too, in fact. 2000's Salvation and 2005's Wicked Prayer. Never heard of them? Well, don't worry. They're not good, and they're somewhat forgettable beyond some interesting casting choices, such as Kristen Dunst in Salvation and Edward Furlong in Wicked Prayer. Beyond that, not much to these films.
Are you an angel? Are you another devil?
Maybe both.
And like we've only been talking really about two real follow-ups, the Remake and City of Angels, and there's two other sequels that exist, and they're so bad you can't even begin to even discuss them. Like Eric Furlong as the next one. It's like, what even are we doing?
I've retained significantly less information from the other two.
Yeah, because there's nothing there. There's like so nothing there.
These are just bad, and bad in ways that are boring. At least City of Angels makes me mad. because like I care about Sarah.
And at least City of Angels is bad in a way that's a little interesting, and The Crow remake is bad because it amplifies everything wrong with modern Hollywood. Those are just bad because they're like the bottom of the barrel, bargain bin, 4-set DVD bullshits that they were made to be.
It's like those what's that company that made like Transmorphers? Asylum, yeah. It's like they're like Asylum movies.
I don't even know if I'd say that, because at least Asylum made Sharknado. Like, they made something that became part of the conversation of pop. Even if it's for how bad it is, at least they leaned into that. Like, this is worse.
I've been pushing down this fire inside of me.
But like none of the Crow sequels that are also just like cynical cash grabs to make money off of fans of this series. None of those sequels, like, no one likes them. No one comes out and is like, actually, I think City of Angels is good. I have fun with it. No one likes it.
I have no doubt people came to these movies wanting to do good. It's just, how do you with that kind of legacy and those people owning the licenses?
I do not struggle at all to imagine that there are filmmakers out there in the world who love The Crow and are like, I have a vision for another film based on this premise and in this with this lore, with this idea, with this aesthetic. Because you know what, before we start shitting on the remake,
yeah, definitely,
that isn't even out yet.
That hasn't come out yet, exactly.
Say what you want about the bad sequels, they at least understood that they should that the characters should be goths.
Are you some kind of ghost?
I cannot even begin to understand the vision behind this remake, wherein they have Eric Draven looking like Little Peep.
Was it Post Malone, Eric Draven? Was that the one that... It's like the same mindset with the Jared Leto Joker, essentially.
Yeah, it is. It's what he looks... It's the same thing. It's this, like, the SoundCloud rapper like ugly tattoos that have no, like... visual... I don't know. Here's the thing. Giving Eric Draven tattoos as an aesthetic decision. Great. That works.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't...
It has to be the right tattoos.
Right tattoos. It has to be the right tattoos. It should be like these black illustrative. They should also be roses. Like not to be too on the nose and annoying about it. But if you're going to give Eric Draven tattoos, I don't know why they're not roses.
That seems even you look at the front cover of the graphic novel. There's a rose right there. It's such an iconic image of the medium. Or even like birds. I'll take birds. I'll take birds.
I don't care if it's unpredictable and on the nose. It can be birds.
Hell, I'll take even a big cross on his back, something like that. This leads us to the remake, which they've been trying to make for ages now, it seems. But it keeps falling apart for one reason or another.
I remember I was watching the trailer for the Crow remake, and I just spent the whole time thinking, why do you want to trick me into thinking this is Batman Begins? It's lit. It's so brightly lit. I feel like I'm walking through, like, office buildings in Chicago.
Or Vancouver. Or Vancouver, alternatively. Which is all of Gotham, apparently, in the Nolan movies. It's all Vancouver.
And then there's especially that one shot of, like, the crows, the birds flying up in like a whirlpool. It's literally just that shot of the bats from Batman Begins.
Yeah, when the bats come down. Yeah, entirely. When he's in the Batcave. And it's his origin point,
It is the exact same shot, and I'm staring at this like, why are you trying to make like a Hammer the Crow into a Christopher Nolan film?
No, yeah. And this thing also with the remake too, like they went through a lot of different actors to get that made, right? They went through. I remember Jason Momoa was on there at one point. Loki, Tom Hiddleston was on there, and like they were all so different than and Brandon Lee. You know, they're so physically different. You would think that Bill Skarsgard would be like the match, you know, because he's so similar physically in some ways to how Brandon Lee looked like in the original film. And yet you look at the two side by side, and it's like, I had a friend of mine who doesn't care about The Crow, doesn't give a crap about it, and even he was saying this doesn't look like The Crow. like he was saying like this looks ridiculous. It's people who don't care about this are noticing it doesn't look right. Like that to me is the big sign.
There's a gentle simplicity to the original design of the Crow's makeup, because it is an homage to, and they make this really clear in the film because the masks are in the corner of the mirror when he does the makeup for the first time. It's an homage to the tragedy and comedy of life masks that represent theater. Like it's a very, and that's like an ancient image that is a millennium old image, and I don't like it's simple, it's perfect, it's recognizable, and it expresses so much, which is that he is no longer like the person he was, and he needs to wear this mask that he's painting onto his face to go out and do the things he needs to do. So like it's not complicated. It's simple and it's perfect and it looks wonderful, and I don't know why they just so clearly overthought it.
Let's focus on a few big things here. The new creators want to turn The Crow into a shared universe, like Marvel or Godzilla. That's one of the big issues I have already with this remake. The trailer, the poster, everything reframes this as a slick action film first, and a movie about grief and pain second. It's impossible to judge the film accurately based on just marketing material, of course, but it's clear from the marketing that they want people to see this film as an action story, a world that can be explored, with grief and aesthetic a distant secondary thought. One of the reasons why I feel like The Crow can never be truly remade, it's also because the goth culture is no longer the same now as it was in the 90s. Like,
it certainly doesn't have the same presence, I think, in the cultural mind as it did in the 90s, and then even in the 2000s when I was growing up. I had a very specific image of what a goth was. This was a type of person I saw out in public all the time. This was a type, like, you know.
I blame malls closing. I blame the malls closing. That's what killed the goth movement.
Given the power of a god.
And on one hand, I feel like the argument there, and I already know I would say this argument, but I want to see what you'd say to it. I feel like we're going to lie on this one. The argument there goes, well, you know, we're going to update The Crow for a new generation. And, you know, the goths aren't as big as they were. So we really want to make it a SoundCloud rapper. That's what we want to do. Because that's the same thing, right? There's no difference at all in terms of, because it's all the edgy underground. It's all the alternative rock thing. I mean, look, when I was a kid, when I was growing up, and I'd flip on the MTVs, you'd see the alternative rock groups come on. You get all your alternate hits like Nickelback and Creed, and there's no different. I see no difference between that and Radiohead at all. They're all the same to me. That's the executive we're talking about here who thought it was a good idea to make The Crow. I can't even keep that.
You're probably right. That's what they're thinking. They're like, oh, the e-boys and the e-girls are the modern equivalent of the goths in 1992.
Yeah.
But
I'm sorry for the psychic damage I just did to you by reminding money that Creed and Nickelback both exist.
When someone dies, a crow carries their soul to the land of the dead.
I really do want to stop hearing people telling me that they're not trying to that this is a readaptation of the comic, because it's not.
Yeah, and even if it was a readaptation of the graphic novel, just like elements from the movie, it's a shitty adaptation of the graphic novel. No. That's the other thing too. Like, even if we go and say, okay, it's readaptation, it's going back to the original text, which we've seen hundreds of times before in other adaptations, it's not good. It doesn't look like it's actually. And one thing that bothers me a lot, beyond the fact that major characters from the graphic novel are not present in any capacity in this new movie, is that it seems like there's an element that it's not about grief, but like a race against the clock.
but you're running out of time to save her.
Which is completely counter to both the original film and because the way the trailer presents it, and when the movie comes out, we could both be proven wrong with this. It sounds like she's trying to save Shelley. Like that if he does something fast enough, he can stop her from dying or rescue or keep her from drowning, or which is beyond what the original film and graphic novel are about. Both of them, it's a year later. Like, it's done. There's no way you can fix the grief. And that's more apparent, I think, in the graphic novel, where it's pure, raw pain. Like, whereas in the film, it's, I'm sorry, about trying to find the value of life in some ways and trying to, and while getting back and getting revenge, there's also a sense that life needs to be valued, that life is this beautiful, wonderful thing. Whereas in the graphic novel, it's the pain of grief. And this makes it feel like you're losing the capability of telling either of those really compelling narratives. To say, oh no, if you just fight fast enough, you can save someone's life. And that's every other movie does that. It's not distinct. I'm sorry, I cut you off there a couple times there.
So okay, this is part of what's like so important to me about Sarah in the film, is this realization for Eric that like he didn't come back to avenge him and Shelley. He's here to save Sarah.
We can't
because
all
that
the time,
was it's the last thing that Shelley says before she dies to the police officer, to Ernie Hudson.
Yeah. Who, by the way, people talk about Paul Rudd not aging. This guy, like...
Ernie Hudson! Have you seen Ernie Hudson's arms?
He fucking...
Ernie Hudson.
Dude is way... That is one of the most attractive 81-year-old men I've ever seen in anything.
Oh, absolutely.
Anyway.
It's the last thing Shelley says, is to tell Eric to take care of Sarah. And that is like it's this important realization that he came back to help her. And what he's helping her with, it's like making sure that her mom is able to take care of her, ultimately saving her from the crime lords. But also just like it's helping Sarah process her grief. Sarah becomes the avatar of the audience in the film, and Sarah becomes the person we're going on this journey with. We also don't want Eric to leave, but we need to accept that he's going to.
It's more like surfing and skating. I wish the rain would stop just once.
Can't rain all the time.
Eric?
But so, one of the things both in the graphic novel and in the film, now how Shelley dies is different in each version, but the thing that is consistent is that Shelley is she's really just a regular person.
Oh, I know, you're gonna see it now. Yeah, I'm with you already, but go for it. Go for it.
Like, and this, a thing that gets me the most is in the film, specifically what happens is, and this, sometimes people who maybe haven't seen the movie in a minute forget this, what Shelley's crime was that she was starting a tenants union.
Yep.
She was arguing against, like she was just trying to prevent predatory rent increases.
How goth is that? Being like pro-union and anti-landlord?
And so that is why they came to her house and they raped and they murdered her.
Yeah.
Right? So it was just like Shelley was just living her life. She was just being a person and she was trying to help her neighbors, and then something horrible happened to her because of it. The remake seems to be implying that Shelley has some kind of a dark past.
I saw things. I shouldn't have seen any of it.
And I know what this is. This is in response. This is a thing that some corporate executive said in response to a long-standing criticism of The Crow, the graphic novel and the film, that Shelley is kind of like an archetypal fridged woman, where she is this perfect, dreamlike, flawless, woman-shaped object that dies at the beginning of the narrative and exists to motivate the male character, right? And I'm not gonna say that that's completely incorrect or completely untrue. I could go on why I think that is not as big an issue in a property like The Crow, that is again so personal and was created as such an expression of like grief and mourning. But it's that can be a little bit of a separate tangent, but like but they looked at this critique and they said, okay, so the way that we can respond to this is we will give Shelley more backstory in the vein of her having a dark criminal, like having a relationship with the people that killed her, having some sort of like past, and by extension making her semi-responsible for her own murder. And the degree to which that fundamentally does not like misses the point that it's random and upsetting and unfair. There isn't a reason. There is not something Shelley could have done to protect herself from this.
Exactly. Like the whole theme is that cruelty is random. Cruelty doesn't need to have a reason. The pointlessness is the point. Like that's how it is. And again, it's born from real pointless pain. You know, James O'Barr's wife is killed in a pointless accident. Brandon Lee is killed in a pointless accident. These stories are, yes, these stories deal with pointless violence, but like that is the point, you know, that life is cruel. And you'd think like, again, the people always try to find curses or patterns in life, but it's life is just chaotic and anything can happen at any moment. I could die right this second talking to you, and for all that can go wrong in life, it's a mess. And the Crow captures that pointlessness in a way that's haunting and sad and mournful and you know, fearful at the same time, but also tries to, and in the film at least, tries to find beauty in life and its fleetingness. In the graphic novel, find sadness and solace in trying to find point in it all. This film does it wrong by giving it a point, you know, which makes the pointless violence no longer pointless. There is a point now. And by giving points, what it effectively does is says, hey, this now, you could have stopped it. Yeah, you could have done something. This is positive. Or at worst, this is karma, which is the worst way you can ever look at that kind of violence.
It's so antithetical. It's so antithetical because this is part of what haunts Eric as a character, and presumably James O'Barr as a person in his expression of this, right? Is like, if I had just done this, could I have stopped it? If I had if Eric had walked into the apartment 10 minutes earlier, could he have been there in time to protect Shelley? And the answer to that is no. And I'm sure like something like James O'Barr, you know, his wife died and it was a car accident. And I'm sure he thinks, I know because I know victims of car accidents think this all the time, if I had left 10 minutes early or 10 minutes later. If I had just one thing differently, I could have fixed it. But no, you couldn't have.
Exactly.
You could not have, like, there is not something you could have done that would have changed this. Because life is because life is cruel, and that cruelty is unfair, and it is like you said, it is random, and it is not like there isn't a thing you can do to prevent it happening to yourself or the people you care about, and that's part of like the process of grief, and that's part of like that acceptance is so important. And so it's just, to me, it is emblematic of the way that the people making this fundamentally just don't understand what the story is about. Either version of the story, whether you want to pull more from the movie or the book, you are fundamentally misunderstanding its messages and its themes and its purpose.
You might think we're being too harsh about a film that hasn't even come out yet. And conceptually, yeah, we haven't seen the film yet. It could be a masterpiece for all we know. But the idea of dragging Eric Draven out of both a figurative and literal grave feels disrespectful, tremendously so. Especially to recontextualize his story in such a way that undermines the original comic and film's themes and aesthetics. You're taking this gothic classic out of the gothic aesthetic. You're taking this story about heartbreak and tragedy away from tragedy. You're sanitizing it. Even the sequels had the good graces not to tell the story of Eric Draven, because Brandon Lee's performance was so tied intrinsically to the character. The other three films, it's different people. It's not Eric Draven, it's always someone else. Because they're using Eric Draven, it feels increasingly cheap and selfish and exploitative. Alex Proyas has already criticized this new film for this, appropriation of this classic character. This is a cash grab. This isn't a film made by someone with a vision. It isn't channeling grief. It's not a tribute to a great actor. It's just being made because The Crow can be put on a t-shirt. It's a recognizable IP. And all of this feels so painfully cynical. And I think that's what rubs me the wrong way about this film. It's not just a remake of a movie I love. It's that it's clearly capitalizing on the memory of the first film. We all remember the film. We've seen it more than once probably. We have the soundtrack, at least kids my age who grew up with the film. This is trying to draw us into theaters while also trying to repackage something that was successful once into a modern reimagining, despite the fact that this modern reimagining already feels dated upon release. And what we're seeing now is that they don't really get what The Crow's about. They just want to slap a coat of paint on something that looks Crow-ish. They want to sell an action film with a recognizable IP to get more butts in the seats. And that attempt is transparent because not one of these people seem to understand what The Crow is. And all this talk of a shared universe for The Crow makes no sense when The Crow itself is not a story that should be expanded. It's a very personal, very insular story about humanity. The world of The Crow is irrelevant to the humanity of The Crow. And it really sucks. It really is depressing to see. Because art can no longer be standalone, it can no longer be singular, it can no longer be its own entity. It has to conform to the demands of the market. Or rather, what the market thinks audiences demand of it. I want to thank Lizzie for taking the time to talk with me. I've linked her socials in the description. If you want to see the full interview, it's available on both my Patreon and my YouTube membership videos. I'm planning on filling both of these sections out with some exclusive content in the near future, but for now, this interview will be a perfect gateway to that. And if you're still here, just watch The Crow. It came out 30 years ago, and it's still one of the best gothic horror films to have come out in any given period of time. It's still a legitimately great movie.